We're at the Florida State Capitol with this week's Florida Newsmaker, House Speaker Will Weatherford. Mr. Speaker, thanks for joining us today.
Honored to be here. Thank you, Ron.
The biggest political story in who knows how long is the resignation, a surprise one, of Lieutenant Governor Jennifer Carroll in this expanding internet cafe scandal. What's your thoughts about the political fallout?
Well, first of all, I think it's a sad day for Florida. Jennifer Carroll has been a friend of mine and a friend of this chamber. She served in the Florida House for 8 years before she would be on to be the Lieutenant Governor of Florida. So we're all sad and have her family in our prayers. What I think it is exposed is what the Florida House has known for quite some time, and that is that these internet cafes are a problem for the state of Florida. And we now know there have been engaged in illegal activity. Many people don't know this, but we actually passed a ban on internet cafes just last year right here in the Florida House. It was not taken up in the Senate, but something tells me that this year, if we pass it again, which we hope to do in the next week or so, that the Senate will pass it as well.
Well, was this a partisan issue last year? Should it be a partisan issue now?
I don't think it should be partisan, but it was partisan last year. I think if you were to go back and look at the votes, predominantly the Republicans voted to ban them, and our members in the minority party did not. It may still be partisan. We're hearing rumblings that it still could be a partisan issue. I hope it's not. To me, it has been exposed that this internet cafe, illegal gaming activity, has been involved in with some very unscrupulous people. We need to ban them. There is no fixing or regulating a broken system like this. It's the largest expansion of gaming in Florida that we've ever had, and it was all done illegally.
Well, and some people are still saying in the industry, regulate us, weed out the bad apples. Are you saying they're all bad apples?
I think that they're all bad apples. I think they're all operating illegally, and we need to shut them down.
Okay, Speaker, your #1 priority in this session is pension reform for state employees. Explain generally why we need that policy change. It's a big one.
It's a big one. I think there's an unknown, unfunded liability. And what that means is right now we have a $19 billion hole versus what we have to pay out over the next several years and what we're actually going to bring in. That's a huge problem for our state workers. We have an opportunity to save our pension system for the people who are currently in it. And then for new employees that come to work for the state of Florida, we're going to move them into what we call a 401k type plan, where you're responsible for the money that we give you and contribute for you, and you have to invest that in the market. The businesses across this country have all made this transition. Government is kind of the last one to the table. It's time to bring our pension system into the 21st century and do the right thing for Florida. Protect our citizens and treat new employees like everybody else in our state, and that is a 401k plan.
Okay, let me just say, if the union guys were sitting here, what they would say is public employees sacrifice a lot to work for our state and other governments, and they deserve this special pension benefit that is not available generally in the private sector. How do you answer that?
They deserve a good pension benefit and a special pension benefit. It just needs to be a defined contribution and not a defined benefit. This year, the state of Florida is going to write a check for $500 million. That's money that is directly coming out of our schools and our healthcare system for the poor and the elderly. And we're going to use that money to bail out a pension fund. We have to do that for the next 28 years to make it solvent, and that's wrong. And I think the Floridians, if our Floridians really knew what we were having to do with our pension fund, they would have stopped it a long time ago.
And as you mentioned, this is only going to affect new state employees as of a date certain, but going forward it's going to save us and the system.
It's a way for us to honor the promise we've made to current employees and come into a new agreement with all new employees.
Governor Scott surprised a lot of people for coming out for the Medicaid expansion for up to 3 years. You and some other Republican leaders did not support that. Explain why.
Well, you know, I can't explain why the governor came out with his position, but what I can say, at least for the Florida House, it relies on the federal government to give us free money, which, you know, any free money from the federal government is questionable at this point. And then the states, it's up to the state to try to figure out how to pay for it in the future. We're talking $3.8 billion just in the next 8 to 10 years, and there's a question mark as to what it would be after that. And so before we start putting, you know, taxes or taking money away from education or healthcare and investing it into this Medicaid expansion, I think we ought to be looking at private sector solutions. I am all for putting the citizens of our state with an insurance policy. We want our citizens to be insured. But, you know, for able-bodied Floridians who have the ability to work, there's a responsibility for them to provide for their own health care as well. And so we're going to have a debate about what a true safety net should look like for our Floridians, but also making sure that we don't rely on federal government money that may not be there one day.
Well, briefly, Mr. Speaker, since we're wrapping up, you've been credited for winning this leadership position at a very young age, but have worked hard for it. You've also been called a Republican leader who approaches leadership in a bipartisan way. How's that working out now that you really have the power?
Well, you know, when you're the Speaker of the House, your job is to serve the members. They're not there to serve you. And that's something that you have to remind yourself of every day. And so we have hopefully set a tone and a culture here in the Florida House that it doesn't matter what party you are, doesn't matter what part of the state you come from. If you have a good idea, it's going to get heard and your voice is going to matter. And I think thus far we have been able to maintain that tone and that culture. And my hope is if there's any priority that I have, it's not a bill or a policy, it's creating a tone and a culture that rewards creativity and people who are fighting to make Florida a better place.
Mr. Speaker, good luck with your session. Thanks for joining us on Florida Newsmakers.
Thank you, Ron.